Today in this video we're gonna talk to Killian from Nimbus Suspensions. We are soon gonna install their setup on Rafiki, and over the years, and especially the last 2 years, and then we want to actually emphasize that especially in Southern Africa, it became very apparent that good suspensions are essential for not only comforts but also to keep your vehicle intact. The corrugations here are so horrible that Rafiki was just vibrating the pieces, really. We almost lost the roof, everything's coming off. So we will soon be upgrading to a new setup, new springs, and especially new shocks. And that's where Nimbus comes in. And they make Oleo-pneumatic suspensions, which is like a hugely different technique than it's used in many like competitive brands, but it's so good to hear like how it works, and the quality of it all, that we're diving into that with Killian from Nimbus, and we're talking about our setup, what they do, how they do it, and how it's going to make a difference. So I hope you like it, and if you have any questions, just drop them below. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully everything is clear. It's stupid that we're in the car whilst we're in this beautiful area, but we're at the shopping center and internet was better here. So no bush this afternoon, unfortunately. Maybe later on, but yeah.
No problem.
So we've been, of course, talking to each other for quite a while now. And I just wanted to tell you that like the whole community that we're in contact with is now getting like a buzz. It's like everybody's super interested at the moment in suspensions, in wear and tear on the vehicle. And I think it's because we have a combination of currently we're sharing about our experiences in Southern Africa, Namibia, Botswana, and we published a few blogs, and it was crazy to see how important suspension is and how it's on everybody's minds. So of course for us, we're running a certain setup at the moment, and we were sharing online that it's like not super ideal at the moment because everything, literally everything, is vibrating to pieces with our current / old setup. I guess also one of the reasons, of course, why we contacted you in the first place, because for us something needs to change, and like over the weeks or months you've proven to be super helpful, super like skilled and knowledgeable. And we were thinking, especially with the buzz that's going on our socials at the moment, people sharing experiences, but it's so hard to comprehend what springs do, what shocks do, how they interact, what works for what setup, maybe even. Can you share some of your thoughts behind like suspension in general? Maybe techniques, but also how things work together. Just what's important for people to know when they talk about suspension?
So there's a lot of different elements that are going to come into play when we speak about suspensions, because suspensions as a whole, then you have your shock, your spring, your sway bars play a role in there too. So each part has its own role, I want to say. So your spring is there to control and to take care of the weight of the car, the weight of the chassis, of the body, sorry. But if you had just springs, your car would just be floating all over the place. And, you get kind of that, I don't know if you've seen like the American cars, they have that jump and it kind of looks the same. It's just jumping up and down all the time. And so that's where your shocks or your dampers come into play. So you have your shocks that are going to come and regulate how the car is going to move through the spring, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, you have your sway bars. So in your case, you have your roof tent. You have quite a bit of equipment on top. And I'm sure you've noticed when you turn, the whole car tends to sway from one side to another. And so that's where
Yeah.
your sway bars are going to come into play as well, because in a straight line, your sway bars don't play any big role in, as far as suspension goes. But once you start turning, they're going to kind of solidify the overall the role of the vehicle from side to side. So if you have a really
Hmm.
thick sway bar, something really strong, you could have a vehicle that just does not move from side to side. But you have to find the proper the proper compromise, because if you have too stiff of a car with a lot of weight on top, when you're going to turn, your car is just going to tip over in a way, if that makes sense, and your wheels are going to come off the ground. So it's always about finding the proper compromise, whether it be with springs, shocks. Now, if we want to go a little bit more into details on shocks, because that's where we come into play. So we work our product with a combination of the proper spring and the Nimbus. But the technology we use is quite a bit different from a regular, I would say, a standard hydraulic damper,
Hmm.
because we play. So instead of having a rod in the center, which connects the
Yeah.
piston, we have a hollow tube, and inside that tube you have air, which mixes with the oil, and that
Yeah.
air acts like an extra, like a helper spring of some sorts. So it's going to come and help relieve the springs and relieve the weight of the vehicle. So you always have to find the proper compromise, once again, to make sure that you're not putting too much strain on the chassis, on the supports. That's an element
Yeah.
we spoke about. In some cases, there's been some certain setups where the support would break, the shock would break, because everything's not adapted, doesn't work well together. Today, if you were to look, for example, so I know you're at around, you're a bit over 3 tons as the overall weight of the vehicle. So you're going to have what a normal person would do is run heavy duty springs, have some shocks that are set up the proper way, and you always have kind of that stiff ride, whether it be loaded or unloaded. You can find something that works decent, but having really that perfect smooth ride, kind of that flying carpet effect, is not
Yeah.
easy to have. And that's basically, in our case, that's where Nimbus really has a big changing element, because by compensating for that spring, we're raising the vehicle just a bit from the spring, and giving it, so the first bit of travel, let's say the first inch or 2 inches, is going to be extremely soft, which allows you to have a smooth ride, whether it be on corrugated roads or rocky roads and that kind of stuff. But then the more you compress the spring, the more you compress the shock, sorry, the stronger the spring inside is going to be. So that's where
Yeah.
we have kind of something really progressive. And that's also where we prevent the vehicle from bottoming out.
Yeah. Yeah. Because um, online we were discussing a little bit, getting advice, and everybody had a different opinion, and it's so good to hear, like, okay, what's the technique behind it? Because what we now have at the moment in the front is heavy duty shocks, um, and the rear has standard shocks with airbags, um, and especially the front, we notice that it's really stiff. So every stone, every little bit of corrugation is almost directly vibrated through the springs into the bodywork, chassis, anything. Um, so that combination that you were talking about, with the progressiveness of the technique, um, that's like that helps in mitigating as the smaller corrugation as well. So correct. So it will like
Yeah.
dampen, take out it. It lets the suspension travel easily in the first bit of travel, and if it really needs to like dampen an impact, then it becomes a lot stiffer. Correct?
Yes, correct. So to give kind of one of the best ways to experience it in an easy way. Let's say you had a syringe filled with air. If you take
Yeah.
that syringe, you plug one side and you try to compress it. The first bit is going to be really easy, and then the more you go, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of principle with our shocks.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing is it helps with many things. So there is added comfort for the driver, of course. You feel more confident in your vehicle because if you get a lot more driver feel, when you're riding around, whether it be on corrugated roads or you have to take a turn a bit fast, or you have to let's say there's an obstacle on the way that you didn't see and you kind of have to go around really quick at the last second. It
Yeah.
helps basically create more confidence. To me, comfort is not only what you feel, it's also how you feel when you're in the car, and you want to be confident in your car. You want to be able to drive it. The way I like to schematize it is you want to be able to drive a Defender almost like you drive a Porsche or a Ferrari, to where it's
Yeah.
stable. You're not scared when you have to take a hard turn at the last minute. And then there's also the comfort for the vehicle itself, so the mechanical comfort. So your Defender, you were talking about all the vibrations earlier, which are just tearing everything apart,
Yeah.
and that's one big element because in addition to being smoother on the driver, you're smoother on the vehicle, and it helps increase the expectancy of the vehicle, how long it lasts, how long parts wear, how much parts wear, whether it be in the steering, whether it be in your bearings and all that kind of stuff, because everything is moving more smoothly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then one of the last added benefits is we were talking about sway earlier. So the role of the shocks isn't to control sway at all. But in our case, with the progressive spring, it does help reduce it and dampen the effects of sway and how much your vehicle is going to be rolling from side to side.
Yeah.
So there is also a great added effect on that side.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because for us, I think in general, we spend about, let's say, 5 to 6 hours of driving each day. Of
Yeah,
course, we have days that we stay in camp or just do a bit of exploring, not really covering a lot of distance, but yeah, it depends. But so comfort for us is super important because on some tracks we're just super tired at the end of the day. And that's mostly due to mostly stress just because of the how everything works and shakes and vibrates and you're constantly trying to compensate for that. Um,
yeah,
and we've talked about it before and it's become more apparent even now with the vibrations and the resonation of everything, like everything constantly moves all day long. And we've said it before, like our roof bolts have come undone more than once. um we've had any bolts coming undone. Actually, everything that we haven't done ourselves with Loctite, plenty of Loctite has come undone. And then it's not only the vehicle, it's everything that we're carrying, like laptops and everything. Cables inside the laptops have been rubbing and been cutting like that.
yeah,
So it's been anything and everything, actually, just that's constantly moving. Um, and it's hard for people to really comprehend how that works and how intense it can be. Um, but yeah, seeing the mechanical wear of the vehicle and everything that we're carrying, we're really hoping or expecting an improvement because, yeah, we just see that what we have now isn't working. So taking out that, how do you say, like the stiffness, but being able to cope
yeah,
with like the vibrations, but also the impacts as well. Um, yeah, we really expect to experience like a massive difference there, and really hope that we can, because for us the vehicle is our home as well, and it's not here for
yeah,
the next it's not our house or travel vehicle for the next 2 weeks, but for the coming years. So we need to
yeah,
keep it in good condition. And yeah, I think in hindsight, of course, we should have done it properly the first time. But of course, yeah, you have to find the right
And it's something.
company. Yeah.
It's something that's hard to realize unless you've experienced it. And sometimes, I mean, you can find suspensions for a Defender uh, for some really, really low price, but you don't realize how much it affects the vehicle in the final usage, and how much it affects for you, your daily life, because you're in the vehicle all day, every day, basically. And in addition to wear and to everything else, it's also just added comfort and added confidence in your vehicle, and knowing that. So that's one thing we've noticed with people who are currently equipped with our suspension, is a road where they used to drive, let's say, 60 kilometers an hour, they're now doing 70, 80, 90 but comfortably, because they just feel more comfortable. They're able to drive better, and they're not just being bounced around in every direction. And one of the reasons, so the Defender is one of the very first vehicles that we did, because I have a lot of experience from the past with Defenders, and I know how uncomfortable they can be from factory. And especially the kind of what we call like the racket effect, to where when you take a speed bump or a big bump, the rear end tends to like kick you in the back, kind of. And that's something we've worked a lot on improving as well, to the point where today, for example, so at the factory we have a Defender 130. And we're able to take a speed bump going 80, 90 kilometers an hour, and the vehicle stays flat, and you don't get bounced around in the car, and everything feels great. The other great thing is also the fact that you can vary the pressure inside of it, so the user has access to that. We recommend, when the vehicle doesn't change more or less than 200 kilograms, to not touch it. We set it up from factory. It's custom for each vehicle. So, for example, your setup is going to be a lot different than someone else who has a different usage, who's going to be doing only road, for example, and no trails. So we try to set it up as perfect as possible out of factory. But let's say tomorrow you're going to go and add a half ton to your vehicle, because you're just going to be carrying something heavy for a certain amount of time. You can go ahead, increase the air pressure, so the vehicle is going to retain and recuperate its standard height, if that makes sense. And you're going to be riding flat again, and you're not going to be, more leaning in the back or in the front, or regardless of what you do. And it helps also when you want to have a suspension and you don't want to change your springs every time you do something. So on the Grenadier, for example, one of our clients has had a stock vehicle, and then he added a winch, a front bumper, and some armor in the front. So the vehicle increased by about 100 kgs, something like this. And all he had to do was increase the air pressure, and the vehicle just came back to the right height and retained the comfort, retained everything,
Yeah, so it prevents a lot of hassle and cost involved, of course, with having to change the whole front suspension setup once again. It's just adjusting and you're done. Yeah, so
Exactly.
coming back to like the whole, maybe nice to know, like the whole process, because everything is custom made to order.
Yes.
So the suspension that we're getting is custom to our vehicle, to our usage needs, etc. So maybe go all the way back. So when a client comes to you, like us, everything is being custom made. So you start the conversation of, like mapping the needs. So how does it go from the customer contacting you to like final production, and where's the factory and everything? So can you take us through that whole process?
So today we're proud to fabricate and produce all of our parts. I mean, 95% of our parts, in France, in the south of Toulouse, which is in the southwest of France. And we chose to fabricate as much as we could in order to control the whole process and not have to rely on the outside entities. So whether it be the fabrication of our supports, all the way to the paint, everything is done here at the factory. We have a lot of elements that come into the quality and the final product, but I think we'll cover that a little bit later. So the process, when someone comes to us and tells us, "Hey, I want suspension for my Defender," for example, the first thing that we need to determine is what's the primary usage of the vehicle. Because let's say you're riding 90% of the time on tarmac and just doing some highway driving, and then 10% of the time you're putting an extra 500 kilograms or 600 kilograms to the car and you're going out to travel. We want to have the vehicle set up perfectly for 90% of the time and then have some adjustments to do for that other 10%. So it's always finding the proper, the right middle point to what are you looking for as the user. So for example, in your case, you're traveling Africa. We know you're going to be driving on some very rough roads, if we can put it that way. And you have a really heavily loaded vehicle, but your weight is not going to change that much. You're going to have some variation, of course, with water weight, diesel weight, and etc. But that's all taken care of when we do the initial setup of the suspension.
Yeah.
So once we've determined your primary usage and what is your goal with the vehicle, because you could just have kind of a pavement princess, and you just want to have a vehicle that looks good, where you have something that's comfortable to ride in, and you can have that modern feel to an older vehicle, for example. So once we've determined that part, it's all about determining where is the weight, how is it set up. So if you have, for example, a roof tent, or if you have an extra tank of diesel in the trunk, the position of the weight, where it's situated and everything is going to change a lot on your final setup. Today we differentiate whether it be front left, front right, rear left, rear right. So each shock is made individually based on what we determine together, because you could have, for example, 50 liters of water on one side, but nothing on the other. So if we do the same in the rear, your vehicle is going to be swaying a little bit more on one side, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And once all of that is determined, we can go ahead and launch the product into production. Of course, there's always the height. We discussed a lot together about whether to raise the vehicle, to keep it at a standard height, what's going to be the best compromise, and what's going to be the best thing to do in order for you to have the wanted result from the suspension.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then that's produced, and then, so we know that people can come to your factory. You work with resellers. We're in Africa. How does that final stage work after production?
So in the final stage, when we send the product, so whether it be the standard kit or the Nimbus Max kit, that's the one we call the Nimbus Max. So one of them is going to have springs. The other is going to be just the shocks if you want to retain the springs that you have on the vehicle. And in that case, we have to know what springs you're running and whether it's a heavy duty, light duty, and all that stuff to make sure that we get the proper setting. In your case, we're going to be sending you the proper springs to go with your setup because it's important for you to be running if you want to have the optimal results. Of course, I recommend changing the springs. We're working closely with IBAC and on some kits with EFS in order to obtain the best results for us. So today we're only running progressive springs. I'm not a big fan of linear rates, but that's to each their own. Just for Nimbus, progressive spring is the best. And we've really worked every piece of the suspension to work for off-roading, for overlanding, for basically traveling and having it be reliable. And if something was to happen, some wear parts, you want to be able to find them in the middle of Africa and not have to be struggling. Oh, it's a custom part, we have to ship it and all that stuff. And when we ship the kit comes with everything you need to install it on the truck. So that goes, I mean, not the wrenches, of course, but you have the gloves, you have the upper support on the Defender for the rear suspension, which is included in the kit because we want to make sure that everybody has the exact same starting point, if that makes sense, and that there's no confusion and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Clear. Yeah. So maybe talking about these materials, with the old springs, the old shocks, we've had some problems in the past with rust, welding, etc. Like manufacturing welds going wrong. So you use aluminum. So do you have something to tell about that? Like the aluminum, why did you opted for that? What's the benefit? Thinking about heat distribution, strength, rust, anything. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So we've really studied each individual part of the shock to have the proper material that's adapted to its use. So today we're using, so we have some aluminum and we also have some steel. The steel is going to be a chromoly steel, which is one of the strongest steels that you can get on the market, which gets heat treated and then gets some chroming done on top of that. And that's going to be your sliding tube inside the suspension. We chose that for the hardness of the metal and how much it resists to all the outside factors as well as friction and all that stuff. And then for every other part of the shock, we're using aluminum. So depending on what part we're talking about, we're going to use a different type of aluminum. For example, the outside cover for that sliding tube is going to be 6082 aluminum because it has a really, really good heat distribution properties. And for the outside cover, we're really looking to deflect the heat and have a shock that remains as cool as possible. Because as you might know, when you're in Africa, when you're in really hot countries, if your shocks get too hot, then you get kind of, we call it the air pump effect, to where the shock is just ineffective and it's just bouncing back and forth. For all our supports and all the structural parts of the shock, we're using 7 series aluminum that we get. So today, the person who gets us the aluminum is the same person who sells it to Airbus and to other aerospace companies. One of the not justification, but one of their justifications for the added price, of course, when you use aerospace grade aluminum, is you have a lot more control of the product. So we have every series that come in, we have 3 to 5 tests that are done on the product to make sure that it's not porous, that there's no imperfections in it, there's no polluting elements, and that the alloy is as pure as it can be. So that's one of the added advantages. Of course, we're looking for quality in every part in every part of the shock, and everything was really studied around having a vehicle that does overlanding with heavy weights and really good structural elements, so that you don't get breakage and it lasts forever, basically.
Yeah. Talking about lasting forever, I know that quite a few people sometimes need to replace shocks because of seals that break, etc. What type of seals do you use? Which quality? And in the end, maybe, I don't know if it has to do with the seals, but some people throw shocks away. I know the Nimbus shocks are reserviceable. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So today we offer lifetime warranty to any product that gets maintenance done to it. So in a shock, there's a couple parts that can wear. So you're going to have your oil, of course, just like an engine. The oil gets worn through times. And longer you use an oil, the more it loses its capacities. Of course, you could have a shock that runs 15 years with the same oil, and it's still going to react okay, but it's never going to be optimal like the same day you had, like the first day you had it. Then you're going to have your seals. So with Oleo-pneumatic technology, with Nimbus, we have a couple different seals from what you would have on a standard shock. We have a lot more guiding elements that we study to have as much reduced friction as we can, because of course, since we're working with a very wide tube, you want to have the least amount of friction, because of course friction leads to more heat, and that's somewhere where we really try to have the best of the best. So I know we spoke about earlier about finding the right element and the right material for each use. And we know that the desert, whether it be the desert, cold desert or hot desert, you want to have something that lasts and that's not going to, for example, crack, that's not going to wear too fast. So today our seals are good up to 280 degrees Celsius and all the way down to negative 200 degrees Celsius. Of course, the oil is going to be is not going to last that much, but for us, it's just an added security. If our seals last more than the oil, in that case, we know that they're safe. And they're usually you'd find them on petrol drilling stations, on anything that's going to have to do with their hydraulic systems and all that stuff. We chose those seals because they're used to being put to a very through a very tough environment, very acidic, a lot of risks of corrosion. They're used all day, every day, and they never stop. And that's one of the areas of the work areas where your seal has to last and it cannot fail. Otherwise, it will lead to other issues. And we've brought it from that work zone, and we've brought it and adapted it to our shocks. And then for our high pressure seal, for example, we're using something that's FKM is going to be the more technical term, but most people would know it as Viton, and it's widely used for high pressure seals in a lot of different areas, simply because it has a really, really good heat efficiency, really low friction, and it's known to last incredibly well under high pressure. So today, the shocks, when you get them, let's say you have a Defender, regular load, they're going to be at about 4 to 6 bars of pressure. So that's 100 to 150 psi. But we know that the seals are good up to 300 bars of pressure. So we really wanted to go overkill on anything that we released. Another element, for example, that we had was adding some graphite to some elements, because graphite is known to be a self lubricant, so it helps everything just reduce friction and glide better together, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, incredible just to hear like the amount of overkill that went into the design and the components used. Yeah, I think that's a big difference to a lot of other like brands on the market. It's just so well designed and specific, especially also for our use, knowing that it has to, one, be reliable, but also gets abused really well on the tracks here. So yeah, no, that's really good to hear. Earlier you said something about having some of the parts with you there.
Yes. So basically, I wanted to show you, because that's one of the main differences you're going to find between a standard shock, for example, and what we're doing. And I know it tends to be not confusing, but it's hard to understand why we do it that way. So I'd love to explain a bit more on this. For example, as you might know, most shocks are going to be running a softer rubber as the lower and upper supports, where you have the upper and lower supports. In our case, since we're taking over some of the weight from the springs, if we had rubber, it would just crush the rubber and have it wear really fast. So what I have right now is for the fender, to give you a better idea. Of course, it varies from vehicle to vehicle. It's always studied based on how the shock works. If you have something that's working very straight or something that's going to be having a lot of lean, etc. So in the front, your upper support is going to be, so you're going to have your valve, as you can see right here. So you can do your pressure through the plastic covers you have on top of the shocks, if you're familiar with those, in the Defender. And then, so we have some polyurethane bushings, which when people first get them, they tend to be like, oh, they're really hard compared to a normal rubber. That's because you don't want them to be crushed under the weight that we're taking over, basically. And so our upper support is going to be a thicker, from what you see on most shocks, a very thick chromoly rod as well, which is we've threaded, and we've had our thing to basically allow us to change the pressure from the valve all the way down to the shock, straight through this piece, this support. So whether it be the front or the rear, we're going to be running a part. So kind of like a ball bearing. I know we spoke about it earlier. That's going to look something like this. And so you have this is the part that's going to go on your chassis, where you have a little kind of a lip that's going to get it right into that shock support hole. And it's going to mount basically this way. And you're going to be holding it, but this is all stiff. So you don't have play in that area. So the shock can really work those first inches of travel without having kind of degradation caused by rubber or all that kind of stuff. And this is a part that we know they wear, just like any ball bearing, just like any ball joints. And we wanted to make sure that if there was to be wear, and you're still in the middle of the desert, and you've gone 150,000 kilometers with them, but after 150,000 kilometers, you're in the desert and they go bad or whatever, that's a part that you will find anywhere in Europe or in Africa, because it's something that you can find as standard on some vehicles. We didn't want to go crazy and create our own part that you could only get from the factory, because as you know, in overlanding, the easier some parts are to find, the better, and that was really the thought behind it. So the ones that come on the shocks from the factory are reinforced and are better than what you could find on the regular markets. But if need be, you're always able to find a replacement part, even if it's not going to last as long or be as high quality. At least it gets you the last bit of way. And then when we're talking about the rear, so this should be familiar, because this is your support on the upper support on the rear of the Defender. And so on this, we're going to have a ball bearing, which I sent you a picture of a bit earlier through WhatsApp. So the way it works in our case, you're going to have your spacer, if you want to call it that way, which is going to slide just snug on here. Then we have our ball bearing, which comes right on it as well, and is going to slide right up there. And then the outside spacer, so you usually have a big round big washer, but in our case it's just an outside spacer that's going to come nice and snug on your bolt right here. You're not going to have play or anything, and then you just close it up and there's no move. And so basically the angle from the top is going to come from that ball bearing, and that's how the whole system was kind of studied, because we know that on the Defender you get a lot of travel, everything moves quite a bit, and even though regular bushings they work well for a standard use.
That was
Yes.
really interesting to see how that whole, like the top that you have there and the bottom come together. Because in my opinion, I always found it a bit strange to see on the like the standard setup, that it's always like it's under so much pressure, and there's always put pressure like unnaturally on certain components. And looking at what you just showed me on the bottom and the top, it's keeping like the products that you have are designed to move freely in certain directions, which aid the movement of the shock. Yeah, where the axle moves.
Yeah.
Towards with the chassis, compared to the
And
chassis.
so we have movement from that upper ball bearing. But if I show you, for example, the let me see, yeah. So that lower one is going to have so they're stiff because you don't want to be able to move them too much, but you're going to have some movement from side to side here as well. Yeah, there we go. Well, so basically, with the added angle from the top and the bottom, you make up for all of this, but the shock is always working without having strain on it from side to side. And the other thing too, because that's something that most people who have bigger trucks, whether it be a Toyota, whether it be a Defender, and that kind of stuff, you know that there's some parts that you have to grease. So you have a greaser, you have to pack some grease in there and everything. And we really, personally, I'm not a big fan of that. And on this ball bearing, we've chosen specifically this kind because, first of all, you have a Kevlar lining, which we can't see on video, but there's a Kevlar lining inside, which is there to help with the play and with the wear. And this is a ball bearing that you never need to grease, so it stays like this. There's no need to add some grease or whatever. There's no maintenance from the user. It's just you throw it on and it's going to last forever, basically.
Yeah, and I can even imagine that these parts, they don't have any strain on them, but they're also not getting overused. It's like the perfect design because it's just moving a little bit with the shock, but of course the shock is doing the work. This is just to give the shock a little bit of movement. Yeah, good to know. So I know for us, especially now in Botswana, we were near the Okavango Delta. Like these units are both completely sealed and everything. So if we go through a water crossing, that won't be any problem.
Oh yeah, no, of course not. Everything has so. In addition to everything that you see, they're sealed, but they're also, they're waterproof. They're okay to be put in water. They can work with a water crossing. Every element we have we've really made it for overlanding with all the elements in mind, whether it be sand, whether it be water, whether it be mud, all that kind of stuff. And so that's something. So I don't have one with me right now, but for example, the cover is aluminum, but also helps us having something stiff with a controlled amount of space between the tube that doesn't move and your cover, so that rocks don't get in there, sand doesn't get in there as much, and that it doesn't come and scrape your center tube, for example.
Yeah. Thinking about it with water and stuff. We've talked about the testing procedures that the suspension goes through. You pressurize it, even almost overpressurize it for normal use, and then put it in water, etc. I recently even saw, of course, that's not a testing procedure, but I saw cool visuals of you putting the Nimbus in fire. Um,
Yeah.
but that was maybe fun and all, but we've been talking about it a little bit before, and apparently everything after that is still fine with the whole unit itself, with the
Yes.
fire, and that's crazy to think. But maybe coming back to the testing of the final product in water, you test the shocks in water, right?
So yes, so we have complete every shock that comes out. Let me see if I have an example here. We have. I'm just going to show one of them, but we have complete checklists of everything that we do with it to make sure that every shock that comes out the factory is up to our standards. And so it helps us. It's quality control. It's not. We're not doing chain builds. We're not sending 100 shocks a day, and they're all like the same. And if there's a small defect, it doesn't matter. It's quality control from the very first part, which is going to be machining. We have Julien who does our machining, and does all the control of the parts, making sure that everything is up to the right tolerances, all the way down to shipping. So we have quality control for shipping as well, to make sure that everything is packed properly, you have the proper writing, you know which shock goes where, etc. So one of the testing procedures is going to be pressurizing, for example, the shock to 20 bars, which is 500 psi, if I'm not wrong. So we pressurize it to 500 psi, and we leave it in water for about 48 hours, and that helps us so make sure that if there's any small leak, any micro leak, we'd see small bubbles form or something like this. It helps us make sure that the metal is not porous, even though we already have all the control from the provider, the metal provider, and that's one of the procedures. To bounce back on what you were talking about with the fire, so today we're working with Cerakote, which has really high quality paint, and it has a lot of added qualities. Some of them they're not necessary since we're using aluminum, but it has really good corrosion resistance, really good resistance to sandblasting, if that makes sense. So when you're running in sand all day, it's not going to be just wearing the paint and you're going to end up with something that looks weird. And in addition to that, really good heat temperature qualities. So it's going to be with temperature dissipation, as well as resistance to temperature. So when you saw on the coals, the shock was at about 480 degrees centigrade. And the paint did not scuff, it didn't bubble or anything, it just stood there. And the shock was pulled back out, you let it cool down, of course, and then you're able to use it again. And the seals were okay, and everything else was okay. And that's one of the great things, in my opinion, when you're really working on a product, when you see it really come to fruition and have all those qualities actually work. So what you see on paper works in real life. It's always really interesting.
Yeah. No, and it was just cool to see. But even hearing that the product still works after you put it in the fire, even just for a visual creation, that emphasizes the quality of the parts used. So that's always a nice compliment to get afterwards, I guess. Especially for you being so involved with the whole design process that you can actually see it work and withstand stuff like that. That must be pretty cool. So,
yes.
And then, so we've talked about the quality used, or the parts, the quality, etc. The testing, of course, which I think is really important, like all the way from the parts that you use to the final product that's being tested. You are like the Nimbus Suspension has a price point. It's could be seen as quite expensive, in some, through some eyes, of course. For us, looking back, I think with all the hassle that we've experienced on the car, on the parts, on everything that we are carrying, including the risk that it has brought us not riding on the correct suspension, it's something to really consider. So can you tell me a bit more about how the price came to be? Is it parts? Is it quality? Is it the checks involved? Of course, you're making everything custom.
So it's a mix of everything. So first of all, the moment you start talking about aerospace grade for anything, the prices go up tenfold, because it's the same thing Airbus would use, it's the same thing SpaceX would use, it's the same thing any of those big companies would use, and that's why cost of raw material first is already expensive, and then you add to this all the processes that we have, whether it be the quality, the seals, the quality of everything we do, and all the checks that go into it. It's not like building a suspension. It's not something that takes us 30 minutes and it's done. It's something that takes a couple of days to go over every test and make sure every part is okay. And for example, so I know we're talking about raw material. So this right here, this is just a raw, this is aluminum. is going to be eventually turned into your upper support, for example, or this part right here. And there's a lot of machining time, and if the tolerances, if the dimensions of the part and all that stuff is not proper, we don't keep the part as a spare just in case. It just goes in the trash, and we go and pull out a new one, and that ends up showing the quality of the product. Ends up showing, for example, so you spoke about it earlier. This is the suspension that was in the fire. This is the exact one, and it's intact. It's all still there. The color is still good. There's sand in it, but this is all the ball bearings are still okay. They're still rotating, and the product still works great. And that's where there's a big difference between, I would say, a lower end product versus what we do here in Nimbus. And when we talk about quality, there is the quality, of course, of the seals we use, the materials we use, but it goes all the way down to, for example, the logo engraving that you have in the I don't know, we probably can't see it much here, but the logo engraving we have, and every little bit, the tools that we use. Most of our tools today are proprietary. There's nobody else is going to be using the same tools, simply because the product is so specific and everything is so specific. So yeah, that's basically where the price came to be. And I would say the bang for your buck factor is just to my eyes, and having some previous experience with cars, with SUVs, with a lot of Porsche, a lot of Defender, there's just nothing that comes close, in my opinion. That's why I'm really proud of my product. And of course, if you see shock as a consumable, I know a lot of people in the off-road world are going to they know every 6 months they have to change it. So they just go with something really cheap, and it's $60, $80 per shock, and they just change it every 6 months. And I can understand that, but from our standpoint, your suspension is something you're going to keep for life and for the whole time you have your vehicle. And when you look at Defenders, the one I have, for example, in the garage is 32 years old, and no one's ever thought, oh, I'm going to change the whole vehicle. It's just, I love those older vehicles because through the years, it's the last shock you have, it's the last vehicle you have, and it's going to last you forever, basically. And to bounce back on this, for example, that's one thing that we offer here in Nimbus is, let's say today you have a Defender, and then you decide to switch to, let's say, a Toyota, an 80 series or 100 series. We really love when customers, they send their old shocks back, for example, and for us, we're gonna basically build credit from that, and then send them new shocks for the new car, because we want them to be running Nimbus for the rest of their life and the rest of the time they're running an off-road truck. And then every shock that we have, we can recondition, and then basically the whole price, everything goes round and round again, and we never waste a shock, we never throw anything out. And that's the same thing when you do the maintenance. Let's say you have, after 3 years, when you're going to send us your shocks back, we're going to put everything back to new. But that's not just seals and oil. That's seals, oil, paint, any part that has experienced wear. So when you get it back, it's like you have your brand new shocks back in your hand, even though everything is the same as when you first got them.
Yeah. So it's the combination of, like, the price point comes from everything in total, and it's good to know that it's a one-off thing. You don't have to replace it every few years. It's just, you invest once, you can rely on it forever, basically. And I think for us that's the biggest change, because when we're like a week away from civilization and the shock would break, we're in trouble. So yeah, so it's invest once, and of course you do the reconditioning after a few years if necessary, or that's your advice, and then it comes with the lifetime warranty, of course. So yeah, makes sense. Especially with the parts that you're using. yeah, for us, it can't come soon enough, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we've been discussing, I think suspension has been a topic that's been on our minds every day for not only, okay, it's been on our minds since years, but especially since being in Southern Africa, we've become so much aware because everything is intensified with the road conditions here. Yeah, that it's on our mind every day, multiple times a day, and it's going to be such a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, so you can't see it right now, but in the background, right here on my left, I have your future suspension, your future shocks, which are being built actually. Like basically today, everything is in the process of getting built, so they're going to come very soon.
Nice. Oh, nice. That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, amazing. Yeah. We can't wait to see them, to install them, of course, and just feel the
Yeah, of
massive
course.
difference that we're expecting. Yeah, knowing that it's gonna come soon is great. Yeah, I'm thinking, have we missed anything today?
I believe we've spoken a lot about the shocks, and I think we've covered not everything. There's always small things, but a big part of it at least.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll talk again really soon, of course. But yeah, I'm thinking, so
Yes.
we've covered materials, quality, anything. Custom made, of course, which is the biggest factor, I think, that we know. Maybe I want to shortly elaborate on that. Because we got quite a lot of advice, and I'm so happy just to be able to talk to you about our needs and what's necessary. And now knowing that they're made custom to our needs, and knowing that we have your knowledge and the company's knowledge behind it, it's just okay. I can confidently install them, knowing that it's right instead of just messing around. So
Yeah.
we're really like relaxed and confident in a way that we know, okay, once this comes in, it's going to be a game changer for how we drive on the track. So that's, yeah, something we really look
And
forward to.
that's one thing I think that's we can also talk about a little bit is we've had the questions quite often of where can I change the rebound, the high speed and low speed compression, and all that stuff. And today, that's something that we don't have on the shock, but that's a choice simply because as a regular user, you don't necessarily have all the knowledge necessary to really have the perfect setup. So today, we want to when we send out the product, we want it to be already set for your use. You don't have to fiddle with it. You don't have to change everything because the way I like to describe it is you have three settings. Let's say you only have 5 clicks per setting. So it's just like a lock. So you have three of them, 5 clicks every time. So that's 125 different positions at the end. And that's so many possibilities and so much testing that you have to do that for, I would say, a normal user, you don't want to have to fiddle with it and search that much to get the right setup. So the way it comes is already set up properly. But something that happens that's really cool with the technology is when you change the air pressure inside, you get a direct impact on your rebound, on your compression, on everything else. Because, for example, more pressure means that the spring rate inside of the shock is higher. So compression is going to get slowed, of course, because you have a stronger spring rate, and then your rebound is going to be increased because it's pushing a lot more. So every time you vary the pressure, you're playing a direct role on all those elements by only changing one setting without having to touch everything else, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And even that in a normal situation won't even be necessary, right? It's just when you want to adjust for added weight and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No, yeah, yeah.
like I was saying, like if so on that's something. So don't try it at home, like they say on TV. But on the 130, we've added 6 tons in the rear, and just with the shocks, we're able to raise it back up and have it work fine. Of course, that's something that we don't recommend, simply because your supports are going through hell for that a little bit of time, and that's why we adapt the springs. But it shows the capacity of the suspension itself to just take over some weight. But just to give you an idea, so with 6 tons, when the vehicle was on the ground, we had about 35 bars of pressure in each shock. So
wow.
that's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows it's capable,
about
I guess.
it's almost 900 psi per shock, and that's something even in I mean, when we talk about high pressure, everything in the shock is really high pressure. That's also why we really beg people not to play with it too much unless you have the adapted pump and the adapted the right hardware, basically, to fill them back up and everything. Because let's say it's at 10 bars inside, an average compressor is going to go up to 6, maybe 8. So you're never going to be able to fill it back up the way you'd want to. And then the other factor is that when it comes from the factory, it's filled with nitrogen, which is it's more stable. It allows us to have a more stable environment inside the shock, and no humidity, no less different gases, and just have one specific gas, which is going to help us really control the pressure through temperature changes, through weight change and everything. And that's a big element, because when you start filling with it, if you empty all the pressure and you're unable to fill it back up, it's going to be really hard to get that proper feel once again.
Yeah. I hope that once we get it, and you've reassured us in that it's just going to be an install and it's going to be a lot better. You don't have to touch it. But it's great to know, because we've been talking about maybe rebuilding the vehicle in the future, and it's so hard to predict like the future weight of it, of the vehicle, that it's good to know. Of course, there is a range that's already taken into account when the Nimbus shocks are delivered, but that it's also adjustable if we miscalculated it, or miscalculated our predictions, etc. But I guess it will be the same for us now or in the future. But great. I think with that we have everything. I think, of course, we're gonna put this on YouTube. We're gonna put your website in the footnotes, so in the description, so that everybody can actually go to your website, maybe dive into the frequently asked questions, see which vehicles you're currently building suspension for, and then they can go on from there, I would say. Yeah, so with everything that we've covered, I think we've got the basics and everything else. Really hope that this talk was helpful. At least for me, it was really helpful to get a bit of insight into your approach, but also how you do things, and of course how it's going to help us. So yeah, we're just waiting to get them soon, and then install them and see the difference, really experience it. I guess we'll just stay in touch.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're able to discuss and share a bit more on the topic, and I'm really looking forward for you guys to experience the flying carpet effect of the suspension.
Yeah, definitely. You think there's anything else everybody should know about, or where they can find you?
So the best place to find us is, of course, on our social media or on our websites. We always share the upcoming developments and everything that's coming soon, I would say. So yeah, and feel free to reach out with any questions, anything that might need more specific information. We always love answering to more technical comments and all that stuff. And yeah, and I'm really looking forward to have you guys on the cloud.
Yeah, perfect. Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing everything and for your time, of course, this afternoon. And I guess we'll stay in touch and we'll talk to you soon.
Yes. All right. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Perfect. Bye bye.
Bye bye.